Hello, everyone, and welcome to our weekly cyber threat intelligence briefing. Today is September 18th, which is National Cheeseburger Day. But more importantly, for those ice hockey players out there, it is Canadian ice hockey coach Scotty Bowman's birthday. Scotty Bowman, born in Buffalo, New York. He's an old fan favorite of mine. So raise your BK Whopper to Coach Bowman today. In today's briefing, we'll be covering the most recent trends that our threat intelligence team is witnessing in the trenches. My name is Keith Wojcicki, Global Head of Threat Intelligence. This week, we're joined by Senior Vice President George Glass, Vice President Dave Truman, Vice President Sarah Becker, and Senior Associate Ryan Hicks, all from the Cyber Threat Intel team. We'll be covering the following trends that our team is concentrating on. Patch Tuesday, WebP vulnerability, sponsor malware, DARKGATE, BUMBLEBEE, and Sarah is going to provide us with an update on the Ransomware Roundup. With that, I'm going to turn over to George. George?
Thank you very much, Keith. I say this every month, but it just seems to come around quicker and quicker every time. But we've got another Patch Tuesday. Far fewer vulnerabilities fixed than we're probably used to these days, only 66 in total. 2 +1 0 days, and I'll get onto that +1 in just a minute. 9 critical vulnerabilities fixed, 17 privilege escalation, and 24 remote code execution vulnerabilities. So let's take a look at some of those 0 days first. The first 0 day that Microsoft patched is CVE 2023-36802 with a CVSS score of 7.8. And this is a vulnerability in the streaming service proxy. Very limited technical information on this, but what we do know is that that vulnerability allows attackers to elevate privileges to system. No public POC for that one. Second 0 day that we have is CVE 2023-36761 with a CVSS score of 6.2. And this is a Microsoft Word information disclosure vulnerability. Again, very limited technical details on this one right now, but what we do understand is that it allows exfiltration of NTLM hashes, which of course can be remotely cracked, given enough compute and time, or used in pass-the-hash attacks. So certainly one to think about for patching this time round. And then not necessarily a 0 day, but one where a POC is readily available, is CVE 2023-38146 with a CVSS score of 8.8, which is a vulnerability in Windows themes. This allows a threat actor to remotely execute code, and it has been dubbed by the researcher that discovered it, theme bleed. This particular vulnerability allows an attacker to execute arbitrary code via a malicious .theme file. These files and this vulnerability only seem to affect Windows 11, and we've already put some detections in place for that one. So what about this +1 0 day vulnerability? Well, I haven't included Edge and Chromium vulnerabilities in this because that is sort of part of a wider story, which is WebP. WebP is a very widely used image processing library, which appears in many applications, mostly anything to do with Chromium, web browsers. So this also includes Firefox, even though that's not technically Chromium, Electron apps, libraries like FMmpeg, and many more. And this vulnerability has been reported to the open source project WebP by Apple Security and Citizen Lab. And we believe it's likely the root cause of the image IO bug that was fixed by Apple last week, which is CVE 2023-41064 and 41061 respectively. That was a chain of vulnerabilities, one of which affected Image IO and one of it which affected Apple Wallet, which was used to deliver Pegasus malware. So this WebP vulnerability, CVE 2023-4863, has a CVSS score of 9.0. It, as I say, affects many applications, and it's essentially a heap-based buffer overflow. So that allows an attacker to read or modify memory. thus allowing remote code execution. And because this is an image rendering library, rendering an image causes the exploit to run, which makes it a zero-click, much like those vulnerabilities reported and fixed by Apple last week. Now, because this is such a widely used library, it impacts many products. Chromium, as I said, Electron, Firefox. I know for a fact that 1Password is impacted and has since patched, but other open source tooling as well, like FMMPEG, also use this library in there. And this vulnerability has existed since at least 2014. And being an open source library, it means that the patch differential is really fairly trivial. So we can expect that threat actors may be looking to exploit this vulnerability. So how does this affect Windows products from the patch Tuesday? Well, notably, there is an update for Edge, being a Chromium browser. However, looking through the patches, I didn't see anything in there for Microsoft Teams, which of course is an Electron app. So we may be waiting a little while for the team patch for this one. So as with many of these projects that utilize these open source libraries, especially Electron applications, we can expect a pretty significant lag in time to remediate for some of these applications as they need to update Chromium and then Electron, and then they need to re-release their tooling as well. So that could take some time. So yes, one to certainly take a very close look at. It's going to involve getting bills of material, software bill of materials together to understand the potential impact. But certainly one to pay close attention to. Zero-click remote code executions. Yeah, never good to read about. So certainly one to think of in the next few days and weeks. But that's it for these two stories. I'll pass back to Keith. Thanks.
Thanks, George. Appreciate that. Now, going to send over to Dave, talk about sponsor. Dave?
Thank you. ESET Research released a report on a new backdoor being utilized by an advanced persistent threat group. ESET has named the backdoor sponsor. The backdoor itself is a very simple set of inbuilt functionality. This consists of the ability to run commands given by the operator via Windows command prompt cmd.exe, download and execute scripts and binaries from URLs or directly from the C2 server, and update itself or its configuration. This simple set of functionality allows the operator to perform a variety of malicious activity via downloadable entities, whilst keeping the binary itself and therefore what's stored on disk looking relatively innocuous when compared to other malware. The actor used the backdoor to install and run multiple legitimate open source utilities such as plink and SQL extractor, along with minimal utilization of obviously malicious binaries such as Mimikatz. This behavior is likely used to reduce the risks of detection. The initial infection was achieved by exploiting known vulnerabilities in Microsoft Exchange Server. There is a high likelihood that the organizations that were selected for compromise by the attacker were done so because they were in both the set of organizations that the attackers are interested in and the set of organizations who had servers with known exploitable vulnerabilities open to the internet. This should emphasize the importance of robust and timely patching processes. Thank you, Keith.
Thank you, Dave. Appreciate it. And we're going to send it back to Ryan, talk about DARKGATE. Ryan?
Thanks, Keith. Hi, everyone. So we've recently observed cases of DARKGATE malware being delivered to several organizations in the transport and hospitality sectors through Microsoft Teams messages. And this activity has also been reported throughout open source reporting, sharing a number of key indicators with our observations, such as common file names, the same adversary infrastructure, and also similar domain name conventions. So really kind of a wide-scale campaign that we've also seen. The attack started with Teams messages delivered to several users with a SharePoint link to a file, and that file was hosted on a public SharePoint site. And the file names used appear to be part of a generic list of laws for this campaign itself, rather than sort of targeted for each individual victim. And some of the examples of observed file names across the campaign, across open source reporting, are shown there on that second bullet point. but certainly don't appear to be kind of targeted. And going through the attack chain at the bottom there, the downloaded file, a zip file at step 3 at the bottom, contained a .lnk file named identical to the zip. And once executed, the LNK runs a batch script command, and that creates a directory and then copies the legitimate file curl.exe into that directory using a random file name. It then uses the renamed curl executable to download the legitimate autoit scripts and a malicious autoit scripts from the adversary IP address, which is in red there. That autoit scripts injected a payload, which is identified as DARKGATE, into a legitimate running process already in memory. And after that, the target process went on to create further scripts that were unique to each host. It also created a shortcut in the user's start menu to automatically launch those scripts, and that was a means for persistence for this particular campaign. If it could move on to the next slide, please. Just to looking at DARKGATE itself. So DARKGATE's a Windows-based malware, first reported in 2017. Kind of have a range of capabilities, really. It doesn't really kind of focus on one thing, from cryptocurrency mining, file encryption, and remote access. And most recently, really, the author made a post in May, and that's what you see on the right-hand side there, stating that they've decided to rent out the malware for kind of daily, monthly, and lifetime subscriptions. And in the post, they list kind of really a wide, extensive list of features that they say that the malware has, from key logging, privilege escalation to bot management and file management. So kind of stepping back and looking at Teams as a whole, it's not fully understood how the threat actor in this campaign delivered the Teams messages, but it could have potentially been a tool called Teams Fisher that was released recently on GitHub, and something that we reported on, I believe, back in June. And the tool essentially allows for kind of more of an automation for sending these Teams messages into organizations, similar to what we observed. There's also been reporting by Microsoft last week stating that an actor the trackers Storm 0324 had begun to use Teams-based phishing as their initial access vector, shifting away from email phishing. Again, how they're using Teams Fisher, again, very similar to how we observed with DARKGATE. And lastly, on the Teams front, in August, Microsoft reported on APT29 expanding their social engineering techniques by sending victims a Teams message attempting to gather multi-factor authentication tokens, and that's what you see on the bottom right there. And that's all really to say, Teams-related phishing really has seen a large surge in reporting and campaigns in recent months. So really, for our recommendations, firstly, to assess the requirement to allow inbound messaging from external domains, and as that is a configurable option for Teams. And if there is a requirement for this, consider using allow lists for domains so if there's any certain organizations that you imagine will be using this or messaging into your teams, consider kind of using a select list. And then lastly, standard for kind of social engineering side, user awareness for this kind of team social engineering. It may not be something that users expect to see within Teams, so making users aware of this. And that's all from me on DARKGATE. I'll hand back to Keith.
Thank you, Ryan. Now, because we can never get enough of George, we want George to come back and talk about Bumblebee. George?
Thank you, Keith. Yeah, so another sort of blast from the past piece of malware here. Bumblebee is back. It has re-emerged after a 2-month hiatus. It's not uncommon for threat actors to take extended breaks from malware distribution campaigns. I think the timing of this one is a little bit on the nose after we learned about Quackbot's disruption back in August. And this time it's utilizing ForShared's WebDAV service for distribution. The latest version of the malware does include some additional detection evasion techniques. And according to researchers, they are seeing a significant use of the net use command to directly interface with that WebDAV service on forshare.com. That's a really interesting tactic, because I think there's a pretty significant corpus of detection around the net use command, although it is very, very commonly used by administrators as well. So maybe they are looking for organizations where detections for that have been turned off due to the noise that it creates. But certainly very different from previous Bumblebee campaigns that we've written about in the past. The malware does a check for file names containing a single number followed by exe, and that is the malware path. Another very good detection opportunity there, detecting a single character .exe. And again, going back to the defense evasion capability, it has the ability to use Windows management instrumentation, more commonly referred to as WMI. The way that the malware uses virtual machine and sandbox detection as well has increased also. So again, this is something that we'll certainly be tracking closely. I think that the uptick in older, maybe more niche malware may come to the fore again as we move into the autumn and winter months towards the holiday season, as that's typically the prime time for phishing. But that remains to be seen for now. And that is actually it for me today, and I'll pass back to Keith.
Thanks, George. All right, we're gonna follow up here with Sarah to talk about the ransomware roundup. Sarah.
Thank you, Keith. So there is a new ransomware strain that's been discovered. It's after a hacker used it in a recent attack. So the new strain is 3 AM ransomware. So after it was used, it was a backup for a threat actor who failed to deploy a lockbit strain on that victim's network. Researchers state that the use of 3 AM ransomware is rare and was observed in this instance as stated as a backup. 3 AM ransomware steals the data before encrypting it and dropping a ransom note. So within the ransom note, the threat actors state they will sell the information unless they get paid, which, as we've noticed, this is pretty much a common trend amongst ransomware threat actors. They do have a basic negotiation site on the Tor network, as well as now a new data leak site. The negotiation window is accessible from a passkey that is provided to the victim in the ransom note. Researchers assess that the 3 AM, it's written in Rust, and it does not appear to be related to any known ransomware family at this time, so it's making this a newer strain. With 3 AM being a newer threat, it's more likely to bypass defenses and go undetected. So researchers are claiming that the strain was only deployed on 3 machines of the targeted organization, and then activity was blocked on 2 of the systems. So we are keeping up to date with this new ransomware, and that's all for me, Keith.
Thank you very much. Appreciate George, Dave, Sarah, and Ryan. A big thank you to everyone else that's taken the time to tune in to Kroll's weekly threat intelligence briefing. We hope you found this session informative. Enjoy the rest of your day and make sure you tune in to next week. Thank you very much, everyone.